The button. Welcome, everybody, to today's Nonprofit Net Zoominar, Public Relations Strategies and Tactics for Nonprofit Professionals. I'm Dennis Boyer. I'm the chair of the Nonprofit Net Board's Program Committee. We think you're going to pick up some pretty good tips today, pretty important ones, especially if you happen to be resource constrained. Our Zoominars are open to everyone without charge. Bringing them to you does require some funding, so we're hoping that you'll consider supporting us with a suggested donation of $10 to $20 or so. We need your support to keep the Zoominars coming your way, so we'll be sending you a link to our donation page. Also, we do appreciate your feedback on today's Zoominar. It's going to help us plan future Zoominars, and it's important to our speakers. It just takes 1 minute to fill out the survey, so please do so. We'll be sending you a link to that as well. And now, on to today's speaker, Dan Shortridge, who's the author of Do It Yourself Public Relations. Dan is a marketing consultant and former journalist who helps nonprofits tell their stories. Dan has more than 20 years of experience in communications, marketing, and content strategy. He's written nonfiction books, magazine articles, thought leadership columns, news releases, annual reports, social posts, brochures, website copy, you name it, he's written it. Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you all for letting me join you today. This is going to be a pretty rapid fire webinar covering a lot of ground. We'll talk about some contents that are both fundamental to both public relations and marketing. You may have heard or seen those in some other contexts because the principles are kind of central to strategy of any nonprofit organization. But our focus today is about putting ideas into action. How do you implement and execute on fantastic ideas when you may not have a large budget or significant resources to speak of? I absolutely feel where a lot of you are with that. I've worked in state and local government primarily, which rivals some nonprofits in their resources. And I now work with a marketing firm in the Mid-Atlantic that primarily serves nonprofit organizations. Everywhere that I've worked, I've had to create PR systems and plans from scratch, including building media lists every single time. I've never had the luxury of having expensive software or hired consultants to be able to tap into. So I set out to write a book a couple of years ago for an audience that looked exactly like me when I got into doing communications, moving from the journalism world. But I'm not here to sell you on my firm's services or at the book. I'm here to help you with advice and tools that you can use today. The good news is that you can do it all with spreadsheets, a word processing program, and email. In some cases, it's a lot easier that way, especially if you're working on a hyper-local level. You don't need to overly complicate things. I do want to say, before we dive in, that I am incredibly awed by those of you who work in the development and fundraising worlds. Give yourselves a round of applause. If you can cultivate donors and ask for gifts and run peer-to-peer campaigns and handle all of that against the backdrop of the global pandemic over the last couple of years, you can do public relations as well. Working with the media to spread your message isn't that difficult. So what we're doing today is going back to the fundamentals. We'll be reviewing the basics of public relations, identifying some pro tips that you can put into practice. And at the end, you'll get links to 3 handouts that you can use as quick reference guides on a couple of those topics. So I thought we could start with a comparison, what we dream PR planning looks like. This is a shot of a dashboard from a service called Meltwater. Some of you may be familiar with that. There we go. It's incredibly powerful, so it's very nice to have. In my experience, it's also prohibitively expensive. My agency's never had a couple $1,000s to drop on software. If your strategic plan were sentient, this is what it would envision PR planning looking like. Lots of nice columns and rows and deadlines and places for slotting things in with completion dates. In my experience, this is more what PR planning looks like. It's a lot of scattered scribble notes or legal pads or on your phone or on sticky notes all over the place. It's easy to have a lot of ideas, but when you don't have much in the way of resources, it's difficult to have the time or the space to actually do the work. let alone how to make it efficient or determine your effectiveness. For that, you need a PR strategy or system. We'll start with a pretty simple definition just to make sure everyone's on the same page and understanding where I'm coming from. PR is not guaranteed. That's advertising. The only way media coverage is guaranteed is if you're paying for it. Public relations is not working magic. It's just a simple step-by-step process that involves thought and planning. It's not just schmoozing people, but it's about building relationships and telling good stories. It is based on substance. You can have the best connections in the world with top-level reporters, but if you're putting the worst story out there, they're not going to pick it up and publish it. And it's really important to remember that it's one tool in your toolbox. It works in concert with your other tools. Public relations is not a silver bullet. If it were, I'd be making a lot more money than I am now. So if PR isn't a guarantee, why do it? You can connect with new audiences. You have validation from an independent third party, the media. You can take the content you've developed for it and flip it around and use it in other ways for other projects without having to reinvent the wheel. And most of all, it's free except for your time. So these are the principles of effective PR, and these are really foundational. If you don't have these, you're not going to succeed very well. You need to know your audience, understand who you're trying to reach. You need to have action. There has to be substance to what you're doing. And you have to tell a story, a really clear narrative that wraps it all up with a nice, neat bow. If you don't have those things, you're not going to do well. I mentioned having a PR system a few minutes ago, and this is what that's about. 8 simple steps that you can repeat and iterate on and improve on every time. And we're going to break each of these items down in more detail, but they work whether you're a beginner or a publicity veteran, right? They're just a good framework to make sure that each pitch you make is the most effective that it can be. So this data up here, these bullet points are from Independent Sector's 2023 report in the health and confidence of nonprofits. It's on the decline. Just 52% of Americans say that they trust nonprofits. That's down 4 points. Only 34% say they trust the field they described as philanthropy. Distrust increased 5 points there. The most trusted nonprofits were human services, animals/wildlife, health, and youth development. So the good news there is that there's lots of room to grow, lots of potential positive impact that can come from telling your organization's stories. The most important thing you can do, that pro tip at the bottom there, and I'm going to repeat this a couple times during our presentation today. The most important thing you can do to understand where your audience is coming from is to talk to them. Gather details, figure out what platforms they're on, what media outlets they read, what they find of value, what they're looking for, where they're from. Those types of things are really, really important to gather at the outset of any public relations campaign or effort. So in PR, you get to your audience through the media. Over the last decade, especially, the media has been vanishing. They've been going under. Consolidations, closures, buyouts, mergers. It all adds up to having far fewer reporters gathering news than there used to be. Definitely a lot less than when I was a reporter back in the day. Also, far fewer media outlets employing them and publishing the news, especially on the local level where a lot of your organizations operate. This is a map of newspapers in the United States, county by county, as of last year. The dark blue counties have 2 or more newspapers, light blue have 1 newspaper, and the white spots, no newspaper at all. This should be depressing as heck to every American. But if you're in a large market, especially a large population market like the Boston area, there are plenty of options for you to get your story out there. That dark blue cluster in the Northeast is fairly positive news for many of the people on this call. So I left journalism 11 years ago. Since then, the newsroom where I happen to work here in Delaware has withered. Editors, reporters, photographers have all vanished. Headline writers and page designers are in some other state handling multiple newspapers. So you don't have that level of copy editors providing quality content. Reporters put their own stories online, they take their own photos and video, and there are just far fewer stories published now than there were. Where we live, we used to have a robust, locally owned chain of really thick weekly newspapers. Now they're just these thin things tossed at the end of your driveway with stories that you read a week ago on the internet. The positive side of this is that we have multiple new online media outlets. There are new models like journalism collaboratives where organizations join forces to tell really big picture, powerful stories. And we have strong communities on social media that share information about towns and cities. There are also niche sites. In my neck of the woods, which is the Mid-Atlantic coast, there is an incredibly popular and powerful website covering surf fishing, whose readers have driven policy changes on state parks access. That's not a replacement for the mainstream media outlets that have gone away, but it's still something. And there are new outlets like that arising every day. I saw a story just the other day about a team of college journalists in Iowa who purchased 2 local newspapers to keep the community news alive. They were about to be shut down, and they scooped in there, developed the resources, and purchased them up. A good starting point for you in this process is to spend a day writing down and taking notes of all the sources where you and your team get your local news from. Those are the sources that you need to target in your first steps to this process. Once you know your local media, you need to take a deep dive. And if you already read and watch and listen to the news regularly, this shouldn't be too time consuming, just a regular part of your day. But take a little while to see how each outlet approaches the news differently and then take notes on it. One newspaper may like big picture trend articles that lead with a personal story and have lots of data, so you know that's what you need to pitch them. Another might cover a cluster of towns in extreme depth, so you really have to have a geographic connection to those communities, maybe a client or a customer, for them to be interested. Once you've identified those types of stories they like and how they cover them, you can really fine-tune your pitch or your news release. Step 2 in the process is to craft a fascinating story. Here are some basic principles about what makes a good story for the news media. Too much of what the media is sent and they're pitched comes from that right-hand column. You want your stories to be from the left. Okay. You want to avoid the boring, the blah, the status quo, and pitch stories that are different, simple, not complicated, full of emotion, that have some sort of conflict. And touching on innovation is an excellent angle there. So your specific angle, and each story has an angle. I'll start there. It's not a negative term, just a description of what makes your story interesting. So start by drafting your list of story ideas. These are a few common angles that can get attention. Firsts, money, anniversaries, setting a new record, the kind of David versus Goliath, big versus little battle. Scarcity is a big challenge in the nonprofit world these days. Scarcity of resources that can lead to a story if you pitch it in the right way. And forecasting the future is another one. You have a lot of data and information on your sector, the specific field that you focus in, that can help you predict the future in some way. At the bottom is a tip. I don't usually recommend products or services, but I do for this one. Google the Why We Buy newsletter. Caitlin Burgoyne writes it. It comes out each week. It's free. It has great insight into messaging and consumer psychology that will absolutely help your work. One way to ensure that you're making a really compelling pitch is to use a story framework. These are just a few. There are some other great ones you can find out there with a Google search, including the Pixar framework. They help you piece everything together and deliver it all in the right package. So the hero's journey, developed by Joseph Campbell, is one that's commonly used in fiction. The Self, Us, Now framework was developed by Marshall Gans. He's a union organizer who now teaches at Harvard. AIDA, attention, interest, desire, attraction, is a framework that's often used in marketing. You'll hear that a lot in my field. And ADDIE is one that's used in instructional design, teaching, and training. It's not storytelling per se, but the analysis and evaluation phases are good ones to keep in your mind. Connecting to a bigger purpose. So this goes to our step 3. Connecting to a bigger purpose or greater picture will definitely improve your chances to get attention from the media. And this is a point that's maybe more directly relevant to small businesses and government agencies because nonprofits are already part of a larger issue. But it's still important to think about and to articulate that when you're working with reporters. For example, a farmer's market isn't just selling apples and green beans. It's fighting hunger or teaching kids about agriculture or supporting important research on soil health. Some approaches say that you should position your organization against an enemy, right? Someone or something that you oppose. I prefer the method of a guy named Adam Morgan. He's the author of a book called Eating the Big Fish. He says you should fight a monster. An enemy is a threat to you, but a monster is a threat to the larger community, in his words. And that monster could be anything. It could be child poverty, declining test scores, low minimum wage, LGBTQ discrimination. Whatever your monster is, you need to draw some very direct, clear lines between your supporters and your organization's results in fighting it. And you need to make that monster and the threats it poses explicit. Speaking as a reporter, I can tell you, speaking as a former reporter, I can tell you, don't ever assume that reporters are going to understand the broad implications of the story you're telling if you don't put that out there in an explicit way first. Step 4 is make it easy for them, as easy as possible. We talked earlier about the number of reporters and newspapers. There's declining. Number of media outlets is declining. You have to make things as simple, straightforward, and precise as possible so that they will pick it up and run it and go with your story. Sending out a press release is the traditional, tried and true way of telling the media, hey, we've got something going on. If you pick up your local newspaper, a lot of the stories inside are not written by reporters. They've been sent in by garden club members, political candidates, Rotary Club secretaries, local businesses, chambers of commerce, and more. You'll want to run your news release so they'll run yours too, with as little editing as possible. Copy and paste is the goal. We need to make it as easy for them to do their job and help us do ours. So that's the opportunity that are left, or that we have with Vanishing Reporters, right? The people who are left are hungry for material, and we can give it to them. Your news release should cover each of those bullet points, especially the headline, because that's the first thing an editor will read. When you're sending emails, that becomes your subject line. So at the end of this session, you'll get a checklist of everything that a basic news release should include that goes into more depth than this slide. For your main takeaway, you want to make sure that it's comprehensible to someone from the outside. So get a friend or a coworker or a board member, read your draft and provide feedback. Is it clear? Does it make sense? Is it interesting and important? The second part of making it easy and increasing the chances that your story will get picked up is providing good photos and video. That will really improve your odds there. So your photos should feature faces and include clear captions. Faces are one of the number one reasons that a publication will pick up a good photo. Captions are really important because you have to tell them what's going on, who the people are in the photo, and provide a little bit of background. For video, you can take simple shots and strip out the audio. That's known as B-roll in the TV industry. TV will run the footage while the anchor or reporter or you are talking. Number one tip is don't attach photos or video files to an email. They'll end up in spam purgatory, right? These gigantic files just attached to the email there. Create a digital library that the media can download files from 24/7. Flickr and Dropbox make great tools for that. Step number 3 of making it easy is picking the right time. So the best story at the worst time is going to fall short. And this goes back to knowing your media targets and their needs. I once got great coverage of a news release by putting it out on New Year's weekend when everyone in the world was off. But reporters were on duty and looking for a good story. It took me 5 minutes on a Saturday, but we got great coverage. So look for space around the calendar when you have little news coming from the usual sources. One caveat though, sometimes other news will crowd you out. That's just the name of the game. That's how the beast works. So paying attention to what else is going on in your area will definitely help. So you figured out your story, you've done your research, you've covered all your bases, and your board president or director says, let's hold a press conference. For 1 second. Interruption by one of my kids. The fundamental question you need to ask is, do you need an event? And many times you don't. You can get your message and story out there with a news release and by offering follow-up interviews than by holding a press conference. Holding an event also involves a lot of work on your staff's part. It's not something you can just do at the drop of a hat. It takes a lot of planning and coordination. And it also just gives the media a single bite of the apple, right? If something else happens that day, some larger news item that distracts all the outlets, then you may have no one show up and your work is wasted. So think carefully about whether you actually need an event in the first place. If you do hold a media event, it needs to be interesting and visually appealing. As a former reporter, I beg of you, please do not hold a ribbon cutting or a giant check presentation or a groundbreaking with a row of people with shovels in the dirt. Those are called grip and grin photos, VIPs gripping grins and grinning for the camera. In addition to being boring, you shouldn't hold events like this because they don't tell your story. Your story about a new facility opening isn't about a ribbon being cut. It's about new jobs or opportunities coming to your area. Your story about a big donation isn't about a giant check. It's about how your nonprofit can expand its programs or increase your staff. So hold an event that can make your program the focus, not a silly photograph. I'll give you an example. On the left there is what you see often at a news conference. People standing behind a lectern talking, the flags behind them, a row of important VIPs waiting their turn, sitting up at the front. It's conventional, it's standard, and it's oh so boring. On the right is what you see at a truly great event. And this is from your area in Massachusetts. It's a fundraiser and awareness building event called a Kayakathon from a nonprofit called All Out Adventures. They run programs for people with disabilities, with adaptive technology, and volunteers to help people get outdoors. This Kayakathon always gets people out on one of their local rivers. It always gets a lot of media attention, and it's organized around their core mission. It involves a lot of residents and supporters, and it has great visuals that also tell the organization's story at a glance. This is what we do. I went to college with the executive director, a lady named Karen Foster. When I interviewed her for my book, she told me she doesn't do grip and grin events or hold events for the sake of doing events. She said, I'll only do things that fit our mission. There is one caveat to all this, right? Sometimes you have a director or a board president who really wants a standard news conference. They want to be able to stand up there with their state senator or county commissioner. You can hold that on the sidelines of a much larger event. So the worst thing you can do with a media event is to do it on the fly or at the last minute. The most important thing you can do is have a clear purpose and a story to tell. Physical arrangements are the most frequent point of failure for a media event. The tent, the seating, the restrooms, the PA system. What can go wrong will, especially with the PA system. If you have a portable sound system, I guarantee you your batteries will go dead at the precise moment that your governor is standing up there to speak. So those arrangements are also the most visible point of failure. They're also the most painful. Put your most competent person in charge of them, your most organized and best staff member or volunteer in charge of that aspect. Simple things like what's the backdrop are also vitally important. You may remember from, it's getting more than a few years back now, there was an infamous video of former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin being interviewed on TV. In the background behind her, a bunch of live turkeys were being slaughtered. Not the image, not the story that her staff wanted to put out that day. A shared planning checklist, you could keep it in a Google Doc, is essential. One of the tools you'll get at the end is this workbook that has multiple checklists that you can adapt to your needs. All right, interviews are critically important. I'll confess a little something. I hate giving on-camera interviews myself for all those reasons on the screen. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys thinking on their feet, but I've been lucky enough to be in roles where my job is to do the work behind the scene and make other people look good in front of the camera. It's natural to be nervous, but with sufficient planning and by following some simple steps, you can do very well. Without an interview, there is often no story. The media needs to talk to people, often on camera. Even for traditional print outlets, they're doing a lot of video these days. But that doesn't have to be you necessarily. Your job is to identify the person who has the best combination of speaking skills, charisma, and knowledge. There was a study a few years back that identified the person most trusted by consumers to talk about food issues. They concluded that person would be a scientist who is also a mother, combining two authoritative backgrounds into one and putting both the expertise and the message of caring out there. So you may want to have, if you don't have that person combined into one, you may want to have two people who are prepared to talk, each complementing themselves. The best advice I can give you is to practice, 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 and then practice, practice, practice some more. Write your points out as bullets, not complete sentences. Be able to bridge from the question you were actually asked to the question you wish you were asked. And research and guess the questions ahead of time. You can prepare very simply by setting up your phone and recording yourself speaking for really valuable feedback that will help you improve. The important thing to remember is that as the interviewee, you are in control. The reporter doesn't have anything without your answers. And it's okay to say, I don't know. A lot of people are afraid to hear that. Just reply back later that day with the accurate information. Use the opportunity to provide context and simplify information. And never, ever, ever say no comment unless you're a mob boss in a TV crime drama heading down the courthouse steps. Step 7, next to last item in our media cycle, is to spread the word. Okay, this may seem a little paradoxical, but don't leave the distribution up to the media. Make sure everyone in the world sees this. So in addition to a story plan, an event plan, an interview plan, you need to have a distribution plan. Use your success to your advantage. Spread the word widely. Share that coverage that you've won. Ask your partners to talk about it. Paradoxically, it's also that first piece of media coverage you get also makes it easier to get more future media coverage. It's kind of a form of social proof and a signal to other outlets that there's something legit going on here, something important going on here. So you've written a news release, you've gotten a story covered. That's just the start of what we're talking about here. Repurpose your stories as much as you can. With a news release, you have a complete story that you can break apart into pieces and use in all these different forums. Use data points to create infographics for newsletters. Quotes can become the genesis of letters to the editor. And when we're talking about social media, don't forget that only a small fraction of your audience is going to see a single post that you make. It's okay to recycle and repeat. That's where you should be looking at your social data. Look at which points do the best, rewrite them, and then use the content again. Step 8 is about consistency. Just like with exercise and eating right, consistency in public relations is critical. You can build a story planner to help guide your PR efforts, identifying events, themes, and visuals. If you have a big enough story, look at a media event, consider that. Join forces with your partner organizations if needed. 2 is better than 1. And keep your news in front of the media. If you have stories, someone will eventually bite. Let me rephrase that. If you have good stories, someone will eventually bite. So step 8 is going back to step 1 because this is a constant cycle. You need to be monitoring the media for changes in content, in staffing, what else they've covered, and more. Reporters will very often leave for another reporting job or leave for a job in marketing. They don't do goodbye columns or goodbye stories about their own departure. So you may be sending your releases to someone who's no longer there. Studying the press and just keeping an eye on it really helps you in the long run. So these are some of the questions that you submitted to Nonprofit Net when you signed up. We'll go through them one at a time and then take some of your other questions. Hopefully have a little bit of time for that. First question is, what do you do when a reporter doesn't respond to your emails? So this is going to happen more often than not. Job applicants call it ghosting. To get your best results for your news release or your pitch, you have to tailor them to the interests of the reporter and also get the timing right, as we mentioned earlier. So do your research in advance, customize your email. If you are continually striking out, you're not getting any nibbles, call them up and ask for a conversation. Talk about the things that they are interested in, or look to other journalists at that publication or media outlet to see if they might be a better fit. It may be the type of story that you're proposing. If you haven't seen anything similar to that on their broadcast before, they may just not cover that. And that's something you just have to deal with. Number two is what is the best approach for helping people look beyond the name of the organization? I think this was from a nonprofit that has a traditionally religious name, but which has a much broader reach, serving people of all faiths with a variety of services and programs. One way to get past the idea that you're only serving one group of people is to create a tagline that goes on your logo and all sorts of materials. United Jewish Federation serving all of Boston's children, just as an example. You could also develop a descriptive line that follows your organization name and all your materials and press releases. Boston Christian Services, a leading developer of affordable housing in Eastern Massachusetts. Consider it a mini rebrand that makes your services and your appeal explicit, both to the public and to the media outlets that are going to be covering your organization. Question three is, how do you choose which media outlets to pursue when you have limited time and resources? This is a great question because it's so important. You are limited in both your money and your time. You've got to make tough decisions about which media outlets to pursue. The answer is that you pick the ones that your target audience reads or watches or listens to. You can get coverage in a newspaper outside your region, maybe a major metro, but if your donors and your participants don't read it, it doesn't do you any good serving your purpose. And you determine which ones your audience reads by talking to them early on, as we said at the beginning. How do you become more comfortable reaching out cold and maintaining a connection? I love this question because it drives right at the heart of where I am. I'm an introvert. I hate making cold calls. So almost every time I have to dial, I write out a short script. When I'm contacting a reporter for the first time, I try to develop a common ground, talking about someone we used to work with or somewhere we used to work, for example. If they are in your area, it's a lot easier because you have those common physical places and experiences to connect to. The next question is, how do you get the story to the best person? And should you have conversations with reporters before sending a story? So you need to do your research on your reporters and media outlets by reading and watching and listening to them first. And that's the only way to figure out who the best person is, by checking out what they like to report on or what they're assigned to report on most frequently. You can certainly reach out for those introductory conversations, especially if you're new or if your organization is new to an area. But don't make your pitch in that first conversation. Have that be just a get to know you chat. Take the information you gathered and then come back later with a really well-defined pitch. Question is, how do we reach new people outside our existing networks, and how do we effectively market events and convince people to attend? So one of the sad things about the decline in journalism is that news briefs and calendars have largely vanished, except in the most hyper-local of media outlets. Those used to be written by news assistants who have also basically vanished from most newsrooms. So getting coverage ahead of a big public event is difficult. And that's one area where public relations may not help. You may have to take a different approach to that. One way you can get around that is to hook your event to a news angle and pitch a story well in advance of the date that can be tied to the event. For example, if you're trying to get a word out about a local Hispanic festival, the story you're pitching is about the growth of the Hispanic population locally. Just one example of a way to tie your news to an event. How do you move someone from knowing about your organization to taking action, such as donating or attending? And this is another great question, I thought, because it's what I find myself doing most days in my daily work. We're talking here less about public relations and more about the customer or client or supporter journey. So this is a whole separate presentation topic. But in a nutshell, you have to create content like videos, social media posts, and website material that matches your audience's needs, contains useful information, and carries them along that pathway to action. You also need clear calls to action. It doesn't do you any good to get them emotionally ready to donate without a very clear, prominent donate button that they see right at that moment. So you need to have everything queued up. The question is, what is the best social media tool to help spread awareness? It's the one that your audience uses, right? There's not a single best platform for every set of circumstances or every type of organization, because they all have different attributes and strengths and weaknesses, and it depends on how you use them. Facebook is good for events. Instagram is good if you have strong photos. LinkedIn is great for certain types of messaging, such as careers or professional development. But find out in those early conversations that you have what platforms your audience uses and go after them. Is there an email contact list for media outlets in Greater Boston? Not working in Boston personally, I don't know what resources exist in your area, but the good thing is that media lists are a dime a dozen, and they're very easy to create by reading your local outlets and taking notes. Another thing that can help is if you have a partnership or close relationship with another nonprofit that's willing to share its media list. That said, you will still need to customize and tailor it to what the reporters cover. Unless you're very similar to that other nonprofit, your reporters are not going to be covering the same thing. How do you get the media to respond when they have the same go-to set of PR firms or agencies when they have a story idea? I would say that any reporter worth their salt wants to move away from talking to the same old people and organizations all the time. That gets them in a rut. And one thing editors do not like is repeating the use of the same sources. So it's really in their interest to find new people to talk to. Keep pitching your stories and working on how you tell them and positioning yourselves as the experts in your area. Question is, are there any strategies when speaking on social justice, racial equity, anti-oppression, and anti-racism? I'm a middle-aged balding white guy. I haven't had some of those lived experiences that you're talking about. I may not be the right person to get advice from. But for starters, I would suggest working with a DEI professional to make sure your messaging has the right grounding. Beyond that, from a strictly PR perspective, one of the most important things you can do is to showcase the stories of the people who are affected and helped by your programs. Elevate their voices to make them the story and work with them to deliver the messages that you're trying to get out. Question is, how do we break through the noise on social media and build awareness of our organization outside of the community we've been incubating for several years? So social media is really, really tough unless you're paying for it, which is, of course, what the social media platforms want you to do. You are the product on social, and your followers are the product on social. The platforms want you to buy ads. It's plain and simple. What people want on social, what your audience and prospective audience wants, is information and material that has value. And they want to get it right there on social. They don't want to be sent off to a website. Figure out what your target community needs and deliver that to them on this platform. That could be explaining your programs in plain language, focusing on the benefits to the public, cutting through the jargon. As one example, one of my side gigs, I run a weekly marketing and communications jobs list for the Philadelphia and Delaware areas. And the followers have just surged because that's material that people want. They don't want to read inspirational posts. They want to go onto LinkedIn and they want to see lists of jobs. It's a very, very powerful tool there. How do we deal with trolls on social media? I love this question. My view on trolling and social media has done about a 180 since I started working with it professionally. So my answer would be to delete the post, ban the troll. I'm sorry, not delete the post, delete the comment, ban the troll and move on. Don't delete your post. It's really okay to do so. You don't need to waste time or energy trying to convince these people of why you're right when they're not interested in having that conversation. The rest of your audience will appreciate you for it. You create a short statement on your website before you do this, and in the About section of the social platform that explains how and why you'll delete posts, and you'll be in the clear. You can always refer people back to that to explain why you took that action. All right. How do we keep media interested in our work when we don't have many big newsworthy events throughout the year? So this is another great question. By and large, in my experience, the local media has stopped covering events unless they definitely produce some news. They're not going to festivals, they're not going to galas, they're not going to banquets or workshops or conferences. They'll even ignore news conferences. I've seen that happen just over the last 5 to 6 years in my area. They're not attending general events to cover a speaker or a panel unless the speaker is delivering actual news. So focus your attention and effort on the news part rather than the speaker part, and make it explicit for them, right? You also need to schedule events at a time the reporters can attend. Evening events are largely out because deadlines for newspapers and TV are so early in the day. Weekend events are often out because there may be only one or zero reporters on duty. But beyond that, beyond the discussion of events, remind yourselves to focus your storytelling on personal stories throughout the year, really emphasizing the benefits to your audience. Identify stories that reporters can't get anywhere else. You have the data, the programs, and the people to tell the stories about challenges that their audience faces. So package that up in a compelling way and pitch them as standalone stories. Okay, this is the gift part. I have some resources from you that may help. You can download them directly from this website. There's a crisis communication reference sheet, a checklist for writing news releases I mentioned earlier, and a 17-page workbook for planning a media event if you ever find yourself needing to do that. I'm going to drop that link in the chat right now. There we go. If any of this has been useful, the only thing I ask is that you consider taking a few minutes to fill out a quick feedback survey. It's a little bit different from the Nonprofit Net survey, but I'm always looking to improve these presentations and welcome any comments you might have or topics you'd like to hear more about. So I'll drop them in the chat there as well. And that brings us to a wrap. I'm happy to take any more questions now. If you'd like, my contact information is up on the screen. You can follow up later. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's a great networking resource, and we'll check in now. If we have any questions that have come in?
We do, Dan.
Okay, great.
Reverend Dr. Sandy asks, should we send to only one media outlet, or can we submit to multiple outlets at the same time?
Great question. You can definitely send your stories, your news release to multiple outlets at once. That's one of the advantages of doing a news release. And then you see who picks it up. If you are pitching a specific story to one outlet, that's obviously just one at a time, right? If you're trying to develop a relationship and get a really good story in the Globe, then you really want to make sure that you're not pitching it to more than one at once, because the first outlet that runs it is going to have a great time. The other people who run it later on are going to be really, really ticked off with you.
Okay. And what if a reporter has blackballed an organization because of what someone who's no longer in the organization did in the past?
That's a really interesting question. In my experience, and I had this happen at a school district that I worked for. We had, before I got on board, before new leadership got on board, we had a very significant financial scandal. The superintendent and assistant superintendent both left, and there was a lot of bad blood in the community regarding the district. They weren't blackballed necessarily, but we had a really tough job to rebuild the community's trust in the district. And we had some conversations with reporters, sat down with them and explained how we were working to turn it around. The specific things we were doing, we put out news releases, always focusing on the shift to a new dynamic, a new leadership there. So if you've tried that and it hasn't worked, that's an occasion where I would suggest going higher than the reporter, asking this for a sit down with the editor to talk about what you are bringing to the region, the benefits you're working with that go beyond the past.
And do you work exclusively for non-for-profits, or do you work also with for-profits?
Me personally, I work with a firm that works with both. Our emphasis is primarily nonprofit organizations in the Mid-Atlantic region. We do a little bit more than that, depending on the clients that come in. But we have worked with for-profits in the past. For-profit storytelling and public relations is a little bit different because you're obviously trying to sell a product and make money. That's not always the case with nonprofit organizations. It's just a more interesting challenge to work with for-profits.
And a late arriving inquiry. If this is from Elisa, if you believe your story is worthy of national news coverage, how would someone from out of the area best reach out to and connect with the bigger organizations?
Another really great question. The best way to do that is simply again, just as you did with your local outlets, to read those national outlets, figure out which reporters are actively covering those types of stories. Look at other coverage they've done in the past that comes from local organizations, and figure out what the angle was on that, how they got attention, and try to use those, work it into your own pitch, and then just send a nicely worded, relatively short, polite email. That's the best way to do it. National reporters for the New York Times or CNN or NBC or whatever you're looking at there are going to best respond to email. It doesn't take up their time, and then go from there. You can follow up with a phone call in a couple of days after that, and then just see how it goes.
And Carly asks, how do you measure success when doing public relations? Is it all about the amount of news coverage you get? Are there other metrics?
So the traditional method of leverage, the traditional measure in public relations is the amount of news coverage. It's the amount of eyeballs or readership of the publications that you appear in. It's about the number of appearances you make. To me, it's worth taking a little bit deeper look at the exact stories that are being told, the exact ways reporters are covering them, and the impressions and reputation of your organization, and how is that changing or growing or evolving.
Okay, I don't see any further questions at the moment in the chat, but if I may, I just have a little comment for folks who don't know me, which is probably most of the audience. I'm a NPN board member, and I worked in the media for many years, and I'm the MC for today's program. And when you're pitching a story, and Dan, you touched on this earlier, obviously there's a benefit to your organization and your constituency. But in addition, I think it's important, if you can, to show what's in it for the media organization. How does this help them? Is it for an existing constituency? Is it people they want to care about, somebody they want to impress, et cetera, et cetera? Show how it works for them is almost as important as how it works for you.
I would absolutely agree with that. That's a really, really important point, Dennis. For example, If you represent an area, a geographic area that hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, that's a way to boost their appeal in that area. If you're talking about a sector, you can talk about the ways that they're expanding their audience there as well.
Great. Well, again, I don't see at the moment any further questions in the chat. And I would say if you did have something you're wondering about, now would be a good time. We still have some time to go and could accommodate them. Barring that, Dan, did you have any further comments?
No, thank you all for having me today. I was born in the Boston area. Been back there once or twice since, so I always love that experience. Hope everyone has a great rest of the week and does well. Hope this has been useful.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. Talk about practical advice. This has been an hour of it, so thank you so much. One quick reminder to everybody, we hope you'll consider supporting us with a suggested donation of, say, $10 to $20. We need your support to help keep the Zoominars open to everyone without charge. We're sending you a link to our donation page shortly. Now, next month, if you've had a hard time recruiting nonprofit executives, be with us next month when executive search consultant John Tarvin will share how you can gain a competitive edge in the nonprofit executive hiring process. That's Tuesday, April 23rd from 1 to 2 p.m. So thanks so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month.